Thank you so much, sir. I'll begin with what Professor Muni said in the morning. The hope and the energy of the 2006 movement, the 2008 election of Nepal has completely dissipated. There is disillusionment, there is apathy, and Nepal is stuck in a political and constitutional deadlock. The Constituent Assembly ended on on the midnight of May 27th, without a constitution being delivered. The interim constitution has not envisaged such a situation where the CA would fail. Political polarization has deepened, and the piece that Professor Kumar was referring to highlighted how there is institutional tension between constitutional officers, particularly that of the President and Prime Minister. I will talk about the nature of the current crisis, but before that, what I'd like to do is take a step back and look at the transformation that has happened in the past 5 years. And I'll broadly focus on two elements. The first is the transformation of the Maoist party from an insurgent outfit to a democratic force, and through the lens of power sharing and the integration and rehabilitation of their combatants, eventually the Maoist party split with a radical splinter accusing the party establishment of selling out. The other element that I'd like to focus on is the constitution making project and the assertion of the marginalized groups and the debate around federalism. The failure to reach a deal on federalism is what led to the end of the CA and the failure of constitution making. I'll just run through the background. The Maoists, as we know, Nepal was locked in a triangular power conflict in 2005. The king had taken over. That catalyzed a deal between the Maoists and political parties in 7 years ago this November in New Delhi, and that led to the People's Movement in April 2006. The monarch was forced to accept that sovereignty lay with the people and not the palace. The Maoists eventually emerged overground. A ceasefire agreement was signed in November 2006. A peace pact was signed, and an intricate political timetable was laid out where, in return for the Maoists giving up their wartime structures, dissolving parallel governments, dissolving parallel courts, allowing other parties to function in their base areas, the Maoists were given space in the power structure. An interim constitution was promulgated, an interim legislature was constituted in 2007 with Maoist presence, and an interim government was formed where Maoist ministers had space. Now, I just want to highlight the link between the peace process and power sharing here, which had occurred straight after the peace agreement was signed in 2006. Now, this power sharing arrangement, which was based on consensus, broke right after the CA elections of 2008. The Maoists unexpectedly, for most forces, emerged as the single largest party. They had more seats than the other two parties, Nepali Congress and UML, put together. And this election result changed the calculations, because the Maoists read the mandate, read the result as a vindication of their politics, their war, and in a way their agenda. And they went, I would argue, overboard in trying to implement their agenda while they were in power. On the other side, the other two parties and the other forces got frightened. They felt that the Maoists were now able to claim legitimately that they represented the aspirations of the Nepali people, and this fear and insecurity of the other parties translated in their use of this constant rhetoric that the Maoists were out to capture state power. Now, since 2008, we have had 4 governments. The first government had Maoist leadership, but that government, when it had tried to dismiss the the army chief, the Prime Minister Prachand had to resign. The opposition allied and formed an anti-Maoist alliance. And as I said, I think the Maoists did not realize that they went overboard, and they opened up too many fronts and antagonized too many constituencies at the same time, which allowed the opposition forces to come together. But once he resigned and the second government was formed, the Madhav Nepal government, I think that proved to be an unmitigated disaster, because it showed that keeping the Maoists out of the power structure was a recipe for instability. It only radicalized the Maoists further. The peace process, which is the integration and rehabilitation of Maoists, the combatants did not move forward. The Maoists adopted an ultra-nationalist campaign slogan. No work was done on constitution making. That political isolation of the Maoists ended in February 2011, when they supported a UML candidate, Jharanath Khanal, to become the Prime Minister. And eventually the power sharing arrangement worked out to a certain extent when last year in August, the Maoist Vice Chairman Baburam Bhattacharya became the Prime Minister with Madhesi support. Why I just mentioned all these names was just to show the staggering kind of instability that has happened in the past 4 years of government formation, but also some broad lessons that the power sharing experiments showed us. The two key signatories of the 12-point agreement were the Maoists and the Nepali Congress. Since 2008, the Maoists and Nepali Congress have not been in government together, and that, I would argue, has been the root, in a way, of the polarization in Nepal. And what we can clearly see is keeping the Maoists out of the power structure when they legitimately won the elections was an untenable proposition. But the fact that the Nepali Congress is in the opposition right now has not helped either. And the second element of their transformation, the fact that they were getting enmeshed in the power structure, was this integration question. In 2007, over 30,000 Maoist combatants registered in UN monitored camps. They gave in about 3,000, a little more than 3,000 of their weapons in containers which were kept in the UN camps, in these cantonments. After a process of verification, 19,602 Maoist combatants were left in these cantonments. For the past 5 years, there's been this long and protracted debate on the issue of integration, and this debate has touched on many issues. The timing of integration, for example, was one where the democratic parties initially were resistant to the idea of any integration. They felt that this would only enhance Maoist state power, Maoist political power, and would give the Maoists, allow the Maoists to infiltrate in the Nepal army. When these parties were in power later during the Madhav Nepal time, they wanted integration to wrap up as soon as possible because they had the upper hand. That's when the Maoists said that they were not interested in integration till they were back in power. So the peace process issue got linked with who was in the political prospects for the parties in power in Kathmandu at any point. Issues of numbers, how many people would get integrated, the modality of integration, what kind of force would they get integrated in, the standard norms which would be applied for integration, and the rank at which Maoist combatants would get integrated, all occupied. These were the key issues of discourse in this integration debate. Eventually, last year in November, after the election of a Maoist-led government, a deal was reached, a 7-point deal, where it was proposed that a maximum of 6,500 Maoists would be integrated. A special directorate, a general directorate, would be set up under the Nepal Army Command with a specific mandate of industrial security, forest protection, disaster management, and disaster relief and development. And this force would consist both of Maoist personnel, former Maoist combatants, and security personnel. That led to several rounds of regrouping in cantonments where combatants were given several options. They were asked whether they would like to get integrated, whether they would like to retire and walk away with cash, or whether they would like to opt for rehabilitation packages. Only half a dozen combatants out of 17,000 opted for rehabilitation. 15,000 plus combatants have walked away with cash, and only 1,500 have eventually got integrated or have passed the tests for integration. So the cantonments are finally closed down, and that's a big accomplishment of the peace process. The People's Liberation Army, which drew the Nepal army to a stalemate, the well-armed, well-equipped India and US-backed Nepal army to a stalemate, no longer exists, and the Maoists are a normal civilian party as they no longer have this military structure. But as the Maoists got enmeshed in the power structure, as they gave up their PLA, the rift within the Maoist party has increased. Did increase. There were tensions. There have been tensions within Nepal's communist movement for the last 50 years about whether to ally with democratic parties and whether the principal contradiction it was feudalism, which meant monarchy and elements loyal to monarchy, or whether the principal contradiction was with India, and so the goal should be to ally with nationalist elements. Now, Chairman Prachand and Dr. Baburam Bhattrai have categorically taken the line that the aim should be institutionalizing the Federal Democratic Republic, allying with democratic parties, engaging closely with India. But the other section within the party, led by Mohan Vaidyakiran, who is supported by a very radical younger leader, Netra Bikram Chand Biplab, these leaders have taken the line that the aim should be a people's republic, and the principal contradiction, the principal enemy is India. Now, this faction split away from the party in June this year. Within this party, within this radical splinter, one section is understood to be preparing for another armed revolt. So the transformation of the Maoists has occurred, and this is a big accomplishment. They have got integrated into the democratic structure. They are a civilian party and democratic party now. The rhetoric of state capture, I don't buy that at all, and I think that it's used by opponents to score points against the Maoists. But this has come at the cost of the Maoist party splintering and this radical faction emerging. Let me jump to the other element which I want to focus on, which is the assertion of marginalized groups. Nepal has been ruled by a tiny Hindu hill upper caste elite. The hill Brahmins and Kshatris constitute about 29% of the population, but they are dominant in the polity, in the bureaucracy, in the security structures, in the media. And in the past, but it is the Madhesis. Madhesis are people who live in the plains, not largely, but not exclusively in the plains. They speak languages like Avdi, Maithili, Bhojpuri, Hindi, Urdu, Tharu. They have relations across the border in Bihar and UP. Janjatis are indigenous groups who live both in the Tarai and in the hills. Groups like Nevars, Tamangs, Limbus, Rais. The Janjatis and Madhesis together constitute over 65% of the population, but have had very little stake in the power structure in the state. Now, these groups are more aware today than they have ever been, politically more aware and assertive today than they have ever been in Nepal's political history. Now, the core question for these groups was whether the Constituent Assembly and whether would deliver a federal structure, and the debate on federalism, unfortunately, has been distorted, and there hasn't been enough public debate because all the attention for a long time was on power sharing and the peace process questions. I'll broadly tell you the positions. The Nepali Congress and UML, the older parties, can be at best called reluctant converts to federalism. They were very resistant to accept the notion of federalism. It was a movement in Madhes in 2007 which forced these parties to incorporate it in the interim constitution. And even those elements within these parties who accept federalism would like state restructuring to be purely on grounds of economic resource viability questions, and not on the question of identity. The Maoist leadership is hill upper caste as well, but the Maoists mobilized Janjatis and Madhesis and other marginalized groups during the People's War, and the social base, because it comes from marginalized groups, has ensured that the Maoists stick to the federalism agenda. For the Madhesis, the federalism is a core construct and is their main political agenda, and they would like ideally one state in the plains, but they have realized that one state is not practical. There are also tensions with Tharus who are dominant in the western Tarai, and so the compromise formula that the Madhesis and Tharus have come up with is 2 states in the Tarai, and the Janjatis would like to carve out states in a way in the hills which gives them a demographic majority, and where names of the states recognize their historic identity. There were this Constituent Assembly set up a state restructuring committee. That state restructuring committee proposed 14 provinces, and another state restructuring commission proposed 10 provinces. Now, the debate on federalism, and you would perhaps hear this if you follow Nepal, has unfortunately got distilled to whether you accept or whether you are for ethnic federalism or you are against ethnic federalism. I dislike the term ethnic federalism, and I think ethnic federalism is a misleading term because it indicates that one ethnic group would be dominant in a particular province. That is not going to be the case in Nepal. Because of the history of migration, because of mixed settlements, each province would be heterogeneous and would have multiple ethnicities. The question is, while Janjatis, Maoists and Madhesis, who together constitute an alliance and who together had over who commanded 2/3 support on the floor of the House of the CA, they believe in identity-based federalism, which would in the hills recognize that or name provinces based on the historic identity of the ethnic group, which considers that region their homeland. So Kathmandu would be Neva Pradesh, for example, named after the Nevars, and would give them a slight demographic majority, but all citizens within that province would have equal rights. So a hill Brahman or a hill Kshetri would not be discriminated in a particular province just because it is named after somebody else or some other group. And in the Tarai, these groups have settled for, their demand is for 2 provinces. The Nepali Congress and UML did not accept this, and they proposed postponing the issue of federalism for the next parliament. This was not acceptable to the marginalized groups who felt that they would be betrayed again, and on this question was unresolved, and the term of the Constituent Assembly ended. The government even made an effort to extend the term of the CA by 3 months, but the Supreme Court, in what I think is an instance of judicial overreach, clearly stipulated that the CA's term could not be extended because the political class was divided. They could not assert legislative supremacy and had to toe the judiciary's line. So what do we have now? We have a situation where, as I said earlier, the interim constitution did not envisage. The government on that night, 45 minutes before the CA dissolved, declared fresh elections for a CA. Now, to have fresh elections, you need to amend the interim constitution, but there is no parliament. The only way to amend the interim constitution is through the use of
of special or special presidential powers. But the president, a former Nepali Congress leader, has said that he would only use those powers if there is political consensus. Now, there is no political consensus because the opposition, led by the Nepali Congress and UML, have demanded Prime Minister Bhattarai's immediate resignation as a precondition to any deal. So there is this political and constitutional deadlock. Two options have been floated around. The first is whether it's possible, and former lawmakers of the CA floated this first. Maoist chairman Prashant picked it up, and two key leaders of the Nepali Congress, Sher Bahadur Deobai and Ramchandra Paudel, have backed it, which was reviving this constituent assembly. This option basically would have involved coming to an agreement on contentious issues, reviving the CA, promulgating a constitution, and postponing certain issues for the next house. But this is not possible, I think, now, because politically the political theater has got a lot more crowded since May. There are newer parties which have come up, including the radical Maoist splinter. Legally, the Supreme Court did not allow an extension. Would it allow a revival? Morally and ethically, the constituent assembly lawmakers are in a spot because the CA's term, which was originally for 2 years, extended to 4 years, and they could not deliver a constitution. So public opinion does not seem to be in favor of a revival. So the other option is, the only other option is election. And now to get to elections, there needs to be a broad package agreement between the forces on 5 issues. The first is election date, and the most reasonable election date seems to be, and the feasible election date seems to be next April, May. Election system, whether Nepal goes in for a mixed form of mixed election system, which is what it did during the last CA, which would have a mix of first past the post seats as well as proportional representation. A new census is since census results are about to emerge, which shows an increase in the population in the Tarai. Madhesi groups may ask for a fresh round of delimitation. It also shows that more people are identifying themselves as Janjatis. So more Janjati groups have come into existence, and so there could be renegotiation over the exact share in the proportional representation system. Then how much work of the old CA would be preserved, and how would it be preserved, is another element that needs to be negotiated. The fourth, as I said, because there's this constitutional obstacle to get to elections, how does that get resolved? But the most tricky and the most important issue is who leads the government. And power sharing, which is what I began with, has again been the stumbling block here, where the Nepali Congress is demanding leadership. The NC has a very strong sense of entitlement and self-righteousness for some reason, and it believes that for some, there's no political logic that it has offered, but it wants to lead the government when they go to elections. And because it cannot mobilize the streets, it wants the president, who is an ex-NC general secretary, to dismiss this government. And because the president the president has said that he would check with India before doing it, so NC is lobbying in Delhi to get this government out. And so it will depend on how you people react to that request of the NC. The Maoists, for their part, don't want to give up the government and don't see why they should give up the government. But there will have to be some kind of compromise found on an acceptable election government. I think the issue will have to be framed differently. How do you ensure free and fair elections? I mean, that's the core question. The core question is not who leads the government for 4 months in an interim period with a limited mandate. So in the immediate term, that's the challenge. How do you resolve these 5 issues to get to elections? It's given that the political theater has got more fragmented, given that there's no one political force which will probably dominate will probably not dominate the next CA. We are not certain whether the next CA will throw up a constitution either. But to break this impasse, the only way seems to be go back to the people. But if you look at the trajectory and the sheer irresponsibility and the recklessness with which the Nepali political class has managed this historic transition, the prospects are fairly bleak for the prospect of finding a constitutional settlement. Thank you.